You guys aren't going to need to know this. Okay, so here, I do an assignment with this as well. Which of the following policies do you think would be most effective at boosting growth and living standards in a poor country over the long run? There's 7 different ways you can go about this based on this question. So the first one's offer tax incentives for investment by a local firm, offer tax investment for by or to foreign firms, so local and foreign. Give cash payments for good school attendance. So if you value education, that's something you would go with. Crack down on government corruption. If you feel like you have high rates of corruption, you can clean house, fix something through there. You can restrict imports and protect domestic industries. So if you want to build up your own domestic economy, implement a tariff, let's say. Or if you want to open up your economy, be able to trade with more countries, if you allow free trade, that's another way to go about it. And also the last one is give away condoms. So a lot of students get thrown off by this, like, oh, how does that make sense? So giving away condoms, basically what you're doing in these poor countries, you're reducing the growth of your population. So a lot of these third world countries, the population growth is skyrocketing. Basically, they're growing at a much faster rate than their economy and that their natural resources can handle. There's not an infinite amount of anything on this earth. Now they have a set quantity, and by giving away condoms, you can reduce birth rates. By reducing birth rates, there's other benefits to this as well. Okay, so the ways public policy can affect long-run growth and productivity and living standards. So you can affect saving and investment, diminishing returns and the catch-up effect, investment from abroad, education, health and nutrition, property rights and political stability, free trade, research and development, and population growth. So we're not going to cover all of these because, again, a lot of this stuff is intuitive, but we will talk about a couple of the main ones. All right, raising future productivity. If you invest more in current resources and production of capital, the trade-off is, since the resource is scarce, producing more capital requires fewer consumption goods. So if you reduce consumption, you're increasing saving. So here, basically what we're saying, okay, we're going to have access to more tools and infrastructure in the future. Because we're doing that, we're going to have less to spend on consumer products. Now, if you have less to spend, we're assuming these households, they're going to save this money. By increasing their savings, they're going to spend much more in the future. So this has extra saving funds, the production of investment goods. Again, if we reduce consumption, that means we're increasing saving and we're spending less. Now, policies that raise saving and investment. So sometimes you want to increase saving and investment, that you might think that's the way to go. Fewer resources are used to make consumption goods. So if we're producing products or tools to produce a certain product, that means less people are going to consume this as opposed to firms. Now, there's more resources to make capital goods. K increases, and this is going to raise productivity and living standards in the long run. Now, this faster growth is temporary due to diminishing returns to capital. So basically, as we introduce more and more capital into our society, extra output is going to diminish. It's going to be smaller and smaller and smaller. Now, this being, okay, let's just say you're a cashier. You have no technology available to you. All you have is, let's just say, to start, all you have is a piece of paper. No pen, no nothing. Someone comes up, the meal is $5, and they give you 10. Now, let's just say you're not really good at doing math, and you need something to write with. You don't have it. So you're going to have to think of other ways. So let's just say you think about doing it in your head. It's going to be much longer. It might take a little bit longer. Now, multiply this by, let's just say, 100 customers. It's going to be much more time consuming. Now, let's say I introduce a pencil. Now you can do math on your piece of paper. Now, let's say I introduce a calculator. Now, let's say I introduce a credit card machine. Now, let's say I introduce a cash register. Now, let's say I introduce a chip reader. Now, let's say I introduce a new technology. The more and more and more technology I introduce to you, the less in the change of output. You can only be so efficient with the amount of technology and tools that you have available to you. And it gets to a point where, let's say, I completely replace you with a robot. So there's other ways to do this as well, but the main thing is diminishing returns to capital. This is a very same or similar thing to diminishing returns that you talk about in micro. If I give you one cookie compared to the second cookie, how happy are you? from the second cookie to the third, fourth to the fifth, sixth to the seventh. Let's just say we get to 20 cookies. Nobody has a bottomless pit in their stomach. So because of this, your happiness decreases. So diminishing returns to utility is very similar. Diminishing returns to capital. As I introduce more and more and more, the benefit is less and less and less. So here we have the example. So on our y-axis, we have our output per worker, x-axis, capital per worker. Now, as we introduce more and more capital per worker, you see an increase in output. And now it starts to tail off because at one point, there's only so many tools you can introduce to help increase your output. So if workers have little capital, giving them more increases their productivity a lot. So again, let's say you're the cashier, all you have is a piece of paper. You don't have anything else. Now let's say I introduce a pencil. Now you can produce much more. Now let's say I introduce the cash register. Now you can produce much more. So here, it's another way of seeing how you introduce technology or capital and how much you can produce. You change your production because you have more tools available to you. Now, let's just say you start right up here. You have a lot of capital available to you right now. So think about your job right now. Think about the technology you have available to you. If I introduce one more technology that basically helps you reduce, let's just say wait times or production speed by 1/10 of a second. Yes, there's going to be an impact. So there is an increase in output per worker, but this change from this point is much less than this change right here, or from this point to this point. So we call this the catch-up effect. You can apply that to output per worker. So basically it's looking at the change. The change here is much less than the change here and the change here because you already have so much capital available to you. Now, in terms of poor countries, if poor countries have less available to them and we give them more technology, let's just say their country, agricultural-based economy, they produce a lot of crops. Let's say they have no tractors. They're doing everything using a buffalo, a cow, whatever it may be. And we introduce these tractors. Now, when we introduce these tractors, you'll see that they're increasing their output per worker. Now, instead of taking them 10 days to complete a harvest, now let's just say it takes them 5 days. They cut their time down by half because of the new technology. Now, we call this the catch-up effect because this poor country is catching up to this rich country right up here. So this higher point is a rich, lower point is a poor. So by us introducing more and more capital to these poor countries, they catch up. Now, I'm a firm believer in the catch-up effect. I believe that countries that are on the path to growth, if they implement the right rules, regulations, and policies, they can eventually catch up to these advanced economies. And it's just a matter of time before that starts happening. Again, it happens at a much lower rate. It's not just one day, here's a tractor, figure it out. You need to have the human capital. You need to have the technological knowledge to be able to use these in an efficient way. So it's a chain reaction and it takes a long period of time. So if we look at the rich country, let's just say I introduce a new tractor. Again, we're already producing so much as is. It's not going to change our output by that much. The change is much less compared to us introducing a tractor to a third world country. That's basically what this is showing. Our example of the catch-up effect, you guys can read this in the notes. Investment from abroad, another way a country to invest in new capital is foreign direct investment or foreign portfolio investment. Foreign direct investment is capital investment that is owned and operated by a foreign entity. So an example of this, let's just say the United States invest money into a third world country that is predominantly agriculturally based. So we invest our capital, we send our trucks, tractors, machinery to this third world country, and we are owning and operating this. Now the government gets some benefit because let's just say we have to pay a certain amount or we give them access to certain resources, but it's owned by the United States. Now, foreign portfolio investment is investment financed with foreign money, but operated by domestic residents. For this, let's say it's the United States, we're sending money to a third world country, we're sending money specifically, and this third world country gets to choose what they do with it. Basically, they're going to invest it back into capital in order to increase their output. Now, there are some strict regulations with this. You have to use it for production. There's always something in it for the United States. Might make trade easier for us, better relations, so forth. So benefits from investment from abroad, some benefits pull back to the foreign capital owners. So let's just say you're investing in a country, you get something in return in terms of stocks or capital. Increases economy stock of capital, higher productivity, and higher wages. So if their standard of living increases, it's better for them as well. You have state-of-the-art technologies developed in other countries. So basically, you're replacing technology from one country and putting it into another country, and this helps. And this is really good for poor countries that cannot generate enough saving to fund investment projects themselves. So these third world countries, they're spending a lot of their money, let's just say, via corruption. A lot of people are corrupt. They're taking bribes, a lot of misallocation of federal money. So that could be a huge reason why they can't afford to invest into new technology or research and development or sanitation and so forth. So again, everyone wins in this case. Education is basically an investment in human capital. So the gap between wages of educated and uneducated workers in the U.S. each year of schooling raises your workers' wage by 10%. And there's multiple studies out there that the more educated you are, the higher wages you are, and the more job security you have in the future. Now, the opportunity cost of wages foregone is spending years in school. Basically, when you're in school, you're giving up your time and energy and effort where you could be producing, you could be working at that moment. So right now, instead of being in class or enrolled in school, you could be working a job. Now, the reason why you are in school is because you want higher wages later on in life. So you're thinking long run, that's your game plan. Now, if you didn't value that, then you would not be here, obviously. Now, the problem for poor countries is the brain drain. The brain drain is a very interesting concept in economics. It's basically when you're in a third world country and you want an education. You already know in your third world country, they don't spend a lot of money on education. You don't get the best education available. So what do these individuals do? They go to developed countries that have better education. So when we have foreign exchange students from, for example, the Middle East, China, parts of Europe that come to the United States or come to Canada, Germany, the UK, they go there in promise of a better education. Now, what tends to happen is these individuals, they want to stay in these developed countries. Why would you want to stay in a developed country compared to a third world country? Access to better resources, better education, higher wages, more security, it's safer, cleaner environment, better sanitation. The list literally goes on. Now, the reason why this is a big issue is they're not getting this education back to their third world country. So if all of your smart people or people that want an education leave your country, you're left with individuals that don't have an education. So you're never going to progress. So some of the policies set in place are basically these countries, they only allow you to go for a certain amount of time, and after you're done with your degree, you have to return. Or they offer these students a higher wage when they get back. So again, it's other incentives. You have to incentivize these individuals to come back. Now, I can use an example of myself. It's a much smaller brain scale or brain drain example, but I was raised in a small town in California, Visalia. So a lot of my friends that we graduated from high school, we left Visalia. We're one of the least educated cities in the United States. That's because nobody comes back. Now, we're not saying our country is full of people that can't read or write. It's just saying people never come back. Now, the reason why people don't want to come back, one, there's nothing to do there. Two, extremely boring. Three, the jobs available are not as good as, let's just say, in Southern California or Northern California. So the Bay Area or LA, Long Beach, all these other surrounding areas. So what these cities do, they offer incentives, basically higher wages, tax deductibles, being able to get a house at a cheaper price. There's different things that incentivize individuals. Another example, I had a friend who basically graduated from a college in Southern California. He wanted to work out here, but what happened was he got offered a job in Boise, Idaho. Idaho is a very boring state, not a lot to do there, small city. Now, they offered him 3 times the amount of salary that he would get in Southern California. Now, if you have nothing tying you down in Southern California, and if you look at benefits and costs, the benefits outweigh the costs, and you're gonna go take that job. Unfortunately, he did take that job. I could never do that just because I value Southern California too much. It's It's amazing. There's no place like it. But some people, they value different things. So again, based on your values, so just think about it. Would you take a job that paid you $200,000 in Boise, Idaho? Again, the cost of living is extremely low, salary is high, you can live very comfortably out there. Or would you rather take a lesser pay and live in a place with high cost of living, traffic, and so forth? Again, different people have different values. That's just an example of brain drain. Healthcare expenditure. So a lot of countries don't spend enough money on healthcare. People don't have infrastructure set in place to accommodate to all these individuals. So very relevant to today, we have the COVID-19 coronavirus. In these third world countries, it's very hard to basically mitigate for this problem. Again, they don't have the funding, they don't have the healthcare system, they don't have all these things that the United States or these developed countries have. Now you might say, okay, but there's a lot more numbers in these developed countries. Well, that's mostly because we can afford tests. A lot of third world countries can't. There's a lot of things that they have to implement. They have to be on much strict protocol compared to other developed countries. So again, the better healthcare you have, the better life expectancy, the more your workers can work, and so forth. So here we have a study in countries with significant malnourishment, so third world countries, raising workers' caloric intake raises productivity. So when workers are fed and they're fed healthy foods, clean environment, so forth, they can work longer, they live longer, which is good. Again, 1962 to 1995, caloric consumption rose from 44% in South Korea, and economic growth was spectacular. So South Korea is a great example of how to turn around your economy. They increased caloric consumption, they increased sanitation, they increased spending on education, all this stuff. There's certain policies that you can implement. There's not one right way to do this. It's whatever you value, what you think is going to work for your country. All right. All right, property rights and political stability. Now, this is a really important thing. If your country is war-torn and you're going through all of these conflicts, there's a lot of different repercussions of this. One being, people don't want to trade with you. Why would you want to trade with a country that has an illegitimate leader, or a country that's dealing with conflict? There's various reasons why you would not want to associate yourself with this country. So to foster economic growth, you need to protect property rights. Property rights is a big thing we talked about in micro. It's ability for people to exercise authority over resources they own. If there's no incentive to go out and produce, or there's no incentive protecting your rights, people aren't going to go out and produce anything. There's not going to be new ideas. There's not going to be innovation. So your country is stuck in this limbo between wanting to produce and not wanting to produce, because if there's no property rights, the government can basically just steal your idea. If they steal your idea, they benefit from it, not you at all. So with this, you need to have a court system. You need to promote political stability. So a lot of my students that choose third world countries, the first thing they do is do clean house with all government officials, because all these officials are mostly corrupt, or they take bribes, or there's been issues in the past. But what's the alternative to that? How are you going to somehow create a system with a clean house? So there's another trade-off with that as well. It's not always just, let's just eliminate everyone and then start over. So that's not always practical. Property rights, again, this helps create innovation. If you have protection over your property, so if I come up with a new idea to produce, let's say, a new water bottle, I can go out and do that in the United States. I can get a patent, I can get a copyright, whatever I need to do in order to protect my profits. Nobody can take this away from me, assuming that you follow all the rules, regulations. In other countries, you can't go out and produce a new water bottle. If you do, the government's going to take your idea, and with that, there goes your profits. So there's no reason for me to go out of my way and be like, oh, I'm going to make a new water bottle, or I'm going to go do something, because there's no incentive. By having property rights and political stability, you increase your productivity, you foster economic growth, and this is good. You want to have this. Lack of property rights is a major problem. Contracts are hard to enforce. Now there's fraud, corruption. This often goes unpunished because you can take bribes from government officials and so forth. Political instability. You have freaking coups. Basically, creating uncertainty over whether your property rights will be protected in the future. So if there's a lot of turnover, if there's a lot of civil war, this is not good as well. All right, so when people fear their capital may be stolen by criminals or confiscated by a corrupt government, there's less investment, including from abroad. So like what I was mentioning earlier, you don't want to associate yourself with a country that has political instability. It's detrimental for them and is you as well as a trading partner. You don't want to invest in someone that's being shady, let's just say. Now, the result of this is lower living standards. Lower living standards meaning we've talked about various things that result with lower living standards. You have a lower education, less sanitation. Funds are basically going to the rich, and the gap between the rich and the poor have increased. Now, economic stability, efficiency, and healthy growth requires law enforcement, effective courts, a stable constitution, and honest government officials. Now, is this a lot to ask for? 100% yes. There's a lot of stuff to ask for, but this is what you need to do in order to promote growth. Free trade is another way it can make everyone better off. So we've kind of talked about this. If we trade, it makes countries better. You can have an inward-oriented policy. Basically, you're just focused on building up your own economy, and you could care less about everyone else. So you're raising your living standard by avoiding interaction with other countries. An example of this would be the U.S.-China trade war. We were trying to protect our own domestic economy, build ourselves up, and from there, increase our real GDP or GDP per capita. Outward-oriented policies, this is where you want to expand your economy. You want to open yourself up to the rest of the world. This is elimination of restrictions. So basically, you're making trade much more accessible. The more accessible you make trade, the easier it is to integrate yourself with the world economy as well as produce much more. So trade has similar effects as discovering new technologies. It improves productivity and living standards. Countries with inward-oriented policies have generally failed to create growth. So Argentina during the 20th century, they were focused on their own domestic borders. Now, the United States, we don't know the lasting impact of the trade war. Again, it's very hard to tell due to COVID-19. And we'll see what happens throughout this time if these policies still hold. But for the most part, we always see that trade is a good thing. When we have trade, you see an increase in growth. We've done calculations in class. For the most part, trade is the best way to go. Opening yourself up to trade is good because somebody else might be more efficient at producing a product that you're trying to produce domestically. So looking at comparative advantage, this is why this is good. Research and development. So the more you pump into research and development, the basically more you can produce in the long run. I'll let you guys read that. Population growth. A large population means more workers can produce goods and services, larger output, but there are a couple of reasons why having an increased population growth is not good as well. You're stretching your natural resources. Basically, we only have so many resources available to us. A lot of the problems that we are encountering is because of our large population, and that's said by various scientists, economists. We only have so much available. Now, it's not saying we can work around this. There are ways to work around this, and that has been proven throughout time. So because we're stretching our natural resources, we only have so much oil available to us, so much water, and so forth. But throughout time, we have made changes. So we've turned to hydrogen cars, or we've turned to electric cars. There's different things we can do to help fix this problem. Diluting the capital stock. So high population growth means higher L, and we have less capital to spread per worker. So if we have 400 million people in a country, and we only have so much labor, again, we can't introduce labor to each single individual to increase productivity. So because of this, if we don't have enough capital to sustain our growing labor, you're going to have lower productivity and lower living standards. Now, to combat this, there's government regulations. So China implemented the one-child law to reduce population, increased awareness of birth control. So in a lot of these third world countries, whether it be due to religion, whether it be due to culture, they don't have access to birth control. Now, if you do increase this, you'll decrease your population growth. There's less children being born where we can't sustain. And then also equal opportunities for women. So if we promote female literacy to raise opportunity costs of having babies. So if we pay our females much more, or if we incentivize them to join the labor force, it's going to have a positive impact. Now, if they hold higher positions, they're less likely to have children. Now, that's another way to do this as well. Now, we want to be able to create equal opportunities for women across the board. There are studies that show there is a wage gap, there is a gender gap, and I'm more than happy to argue with anyone that thinks otherwise. I have various research to support that, as well as faculty at distinguished universities that can support that claim as well. So it is important that we create these equal opportunities for women and help just not in our society alone, but in the world as well. All right, so promoting technological progress. So the world population growth, the more technology we have, the more people we have, the more scientists, the more inventors, more engineers, more frequent discoveries. If we have more technological progress, we're going to have better innovation in the future. All right, so in the long run, living standards are determined by productivity. We can affect productivity in different ways, whether it be through health, education, capital available, population. All this stuff plays a huge role in creating a productive and healthy and sustainable economy. So there's different ways you can go about this, whatever you value, and you'll see different countries invest into different things. There's some countries that don't invest as much money into national defense. There's some countries that do. There's some countries that care more about education. There's some countries that don't. There's different things you can do about it. There's not one correct answer to promoting growth. That's proven throughout history. But everything we talked about in this class is an example of something you can implement and something that does have an impact. All right, so that's going to be all for Chapter 12. Again, it's very intuitive if you understand these concepts. If you don't, by all means, drop a comment, email me. We'll have Zoom sessions, so by all means, let me know. I'm here to help you guys as much as I possibly can. I know it's a tough time right now, but you stick with me, I'll stick with you, and we'll get you through this, I promise. But for now, that's going to be it. I will see you guys next time. Thank you.